Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and I have a huge number of pre-notified supplementary requests, so in order to get as many people in as possible, I would prefer short and succinct questions and answers to match. Please. Question number 1 is Paul Martin.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met representatives of Glasgow City Council.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Scottish Government meets regularly with representatives of Scotland's councils, including Glasgow City Council, to discuss a range of issues.
Paul Martin.
Presiding Officer, I wonder if the Minister could enlighten me, indeed not just with his discussions with Glasgow City Council, but indeed any other council, whether the Government still intend to bring forward their flagship policy to introduce a local income tax.
Minister.
The member will welcome that the Scottish Government has delivered the council tax freeze for a number of years now, again this financial year. But in terms of the replacement of the unfair council tax, we will bring forward a consultation on a replacement in the lifetime of this Parliament, in line with the manifesto on which this party and this government was elected.
Thank you. Question number 2, Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what economic risks an independent Scotland would face if it was to use sterling without being in a formal currency union with the rest of the UK.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Fiscal Commission Working Group set out a number of viable currency options for a country of Scotland's size and economic strength. They concluded that retaining sterling as part of a formal monetary union with the rest of the United Kingdom would be the best option, both for an independent Scotland and for the rest of the UK. The Scottish Government is clear that an independent Scotland will retain sterling as set out our currency proposals in pages 109 to 117 of Scotland's future.
Elaine Murray.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. This morning's press reports that Alistair Cotton, Head of Corporate Dealing for Currencies Direct, states that using a currency without a formal union would leave an independent Scotland without the economic levers to fully support its financial sector. And Owen Kelly of Scottish Financial Enterprises believes that using the pound without a formal currency union could threaten Scotland's membership of the EU. Is continuing to use the pound, irrespective of currency union, a viable plan B?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I indicated to Dr Murray in my original answer, the Fiscal Commission Working Group looked at a number of viable options and assessed and considered the different propositions and the contents of those different options. The Scottish Government was clear that we supported and endorsed the preferred option of the Fiscal Commission Working Group, which was to retain sterling as part of a formal monetary union with the rest of the United Kingdom, and the Scottish Government will continue to set out that proposition to the people of our country.
Thank you. Very briefly, Marco Biaggi.
Alistair Darling has been noted for saying that a currency union is logical and desirable, but now we have added to that Jackson Carlaw's endorsement that a union would be rational and sensible. Does the Finance Secretary agree with me that George Osborne now and George Osborne the day after a yes vote will be very different with regard to a currency union, not least because it will be in the overwhelming interests of both Scotland and the rest of the UK to conclude that deal and conclude it swiftly?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think Mr Biaggi makes a very fair and strong point that the issue of the transaction costs that are saved for businesses south of the border as a consequence of the existence of a formal currency union has been a point made clearly by the Scottish Government. It would amount to, in our estimate, a figure of around £500 million, which would be a significant undertaking for businesses in the rest of the United Kingdom. And of course, there is the other aspect of this argument, which is that if George Osborne is to sustain the line of argument he was advancing in his speech to Edinburgh a week past Thursday, he would in fact be arguing essentially for the rest of the United Kingdom to assume the entirety of the national debt of the United Kingdom, and I can't imagine taxpayers south of the border will want to wrestle with that particular obligation that would be greater than what would be in existence if there was a formal currency union between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom.
Briefly, please, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary and his colleagues are fond of quoting from Nobel Prize-winning economists. I wonder if he read the piece in the New York Times on Monday from the Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, who said in relation to the campaign for independence on currency, what it has said on that crucial issue seems deeply muddle-headed and also sharing a common currency without a shared federal government is very dangerous. Is that not a damning verdict on Mr Swinney's policy?
Cabinet Secretary.
No. What I think is worthy of analysis is the comparison between the report of the Fiscal Commission and the speech delivered in Edinburgh by the Governor of the Bank of England. And I think if Mr Fraser was to go off and do some homework by looking at the contents of the Fiscal Commission report, the issues that are raised, the solutions offered to some of the issues on currency zone by the Fiscal Commission, and compare that with the analysis put forward very fairly, very reasonably and dispassionately by the Governor of the Bank of England, I think Mr Fraser would find that there is a very clear and robust relationship in the thinking between what's in the Fiscal Commission report and what's in the Governor of the Bank of England's statement to the people that he addressed in Edinburgh. And I think that analysis is what must have struck Alistair Darling as making the case for a currency zone logical and desirable. And I'm absolutely delighted that Jackson Carlow has added his significant influence to that process as part of the discussion that we're having.
Question number 3, Stuart Stevenson.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will tackle avoidance of taxes devolved under the Scotland Act 2012.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I have made clear this Government's determination to act decisively on avoidance of devolved taxes. The Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill, which is currently before Parliament, contains powers which will enable Revenue Scotland to take robust action to counteract tax avoidance, and we have included anti-avoidance measures in both of the Devolved Taxes Acts already passed by this Parliament.
Stuart Stevenson.
Is the Minister aware that the latest HMRC figures report that the UK Government is failing to collect £35 billion in taxes due to avoidance schemes, illegal tax dodging and mistaken underpayments? Given that Scotland's share of that is approximately £3.47 billion that's being lost by the UK Treasury, can the Minister tell us how Scotland would benefit between now and 2016 if the UK Government were to implement a general anti-avoidance rule?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I've made clear to Parliament in the introduction of the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill, there will be included in that bill a general anti-avoidance rule, which is simple and more comprehensive than the corresponding provisions that the United Kingdom Government is considering. Our general anti-avoidance rule is designed to catch artificial tax avoidance arrangements, whereas the UK approach is based on a narrow test of abuse. Our general anti-avoidance rule will, of course, only apply to devolved taxes. If we had the ability to apply that across the full range of taxes, we would be able to bring the ethos and the approach that I have set out to the wider consideration of taxation issues. And the final point I'd make to Mr Stevenson is that with the introduction of the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill, I have made clear to Parliament that I do want Parliament to consider and to test the provisions that the Government has put in place, and if there are measures that that Parliament believes would strengthen the general anti-avoidance rule that we've advanced, I would be very open to considering those and to ensuring that Scotland embarks on its approach to tax collection with as robust an approach as we possibly can do to tackling tax avoidance where we possibly can do.
Thank you. Supplementary, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary has spoken about building a new culture in terms of stopping tax avoidance, so that we never see the same scenario that the UK has in place, where so much more effort is spent on chasing a relatively small amount of benefit fraud than a vast amount of tax evasion by the wealthiest. A general anti-avoidance rule is a good start, but does the Cabinet Secretary agree that additional measures, such as conditions to public procurement, for example, or conditions being attached to the corporate welfare payments, such as regional selective assistance grants, these can create additional disincentives for companies to engage in tax avoidance?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I reiterate the last point that I made in my response to Mr Stevenson, that the Scottish Government intends to embark on the design of a tax collection system in Scotland with the maximum intolerance towards tax avoidance. And the test that I've set to my officials, and which I have been advised by the Tax Consultation Forum, whose contribution I value enormously in the formulation of the bill, has been to take that maximalist approach. And I know that's one that Mr Harvey would support, given his contribution to this question over many years within Parliament. So the invitation is there to Parliament to test. I think we've brought forward a very sophisticated proposition in the bill. The invitation is there to Parliament to challenge that, to see if it can be taken a stage further, and I will obviously engage very seriously on this question when the feedback from Parliament is received. It is important in the design of every measure that we undertake that firstly, all measures are legally compliant, and that's an issue the Government would have to wrestle with in relation to the procurement legislation that Mr Harvey referred to, but also that we take every step we can in our wider policy interventions to ensure that the spirit and the letter of measures to tackle tax avoidance is reflected in all of our actions.
Brief supplementary from Gavin Brown and hopefully a brief answer.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary said he had a sophisticated proposition. Can he share with the Chamber the target set for Revenue Scotland in relation to tax avoidance?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I want to minimise tax avoidance. I'm certainly not going to go around saying X amount of tax avoidance is okay. What an absolutely absurd proposition that would. I want to ensure that the Scottish Government is able to take all steps we possibly can do to tackle tax avoidance and to have the measures in place to do so.
Thank you. Question number 4, Richard Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions ministers have had with Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire councils and public sector agencies in the North East regarding the recruitment and retention of staff.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Scottish Government and public bodies have policy and delivery functions across Scotland. Any allocation of central Scottish Government resources, such as to health boards and councils, is typically distributed through a needs-based formula incorporating indicators such as population, deprivation and rurality. It is for councils, in collaboration with their community planning partners, to determine the appropriate uses of the resources under their control, including decisions on recruitment and retention of staff.
Richard Baker.
Last week in the Evening Express, Richard Carey talked to the difficulty of recruiting to the health service in Grampian, and other public sector bodies in the area, and both local authorities have highlighted problems with recruitment due to the high cost of living in Aberdeen and the North East more widely. Can the Minister tell us what consideration the Scottish Government has given or will give to the calls for an Aberdeen waiting made by local trade unions and others in the area?
Minister.
Well, we are able to give local employers the flexibility to deliver schemes that are suitable for local circumstances where there are pressure points, and these exist. And in terms of the health service, the Cabinet Secretary receives updates in terms of any vacancies that may arrive. So we keep a close watch on this. But I tell you, this relates to the general issue of resourcing, and the local authority was mentioned. And I think it would be somewhat easier for Aberdeen City Council if they had access to the £7.3 million that the Labour Party has denied to that particular area, having turned down the very needs-based formula that would have, on this occasion, supported Aberdeen City Council. So it very much relates to resources, and I would ask the Labour Party to look very closely at the mess that they've created in the city.
Thank you. Brief supplementary, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree with me that the main problem in recruitment and retention of staff is the lack of affordable housing? And would it not be better for the Labour-led Council to agree with the proposal from the SNP group on the Council that the strategic infrastructure plan should include the building of 2,000 council houses instead of their suggestion of 1,000 private sector and shared equity homes?
Minister.
Well, clearly housing is a critical issue where there is concern around growth and demand in that particular part of the country. And I'm sure that Maureen Watt would welcome the fact that housing resources have increased in terms of the share to Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire in terms of the housing planning resource assumptions. And as well as that, to the local authority, as I say, if we had followed the needs-based formula, not only would revenue to Aberdeen City Council have increased, but so too would have capital increased as well, giving the Council even greater flexibility to deliver on housing targets. So I am at a complete loss as to why the Labour leadership at Aberdeen City Council has turned down extra resources for their area. It seems a mixture of ignorance, incompetence and ineptitude.
Question number 5, John Pentland.
To ask the Scottish Government when the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Employment and Sustainable Growth last met the Chancellor of Exchequer and what was discussed.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, Scottish ministers regularly meet with ministers from the UK Treasury to promote the steps we are taking within our limited powers to deliver a more prosperous and fairer Scotland. I will be engaging with UK ministers in the coming weeks to highlight Scotland's priorities for the UK budget in March.
John Pentland.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Assuming that you are not sticking with Plan A like the Deputy First Minister, can you tell me whether the FM's Plan B would be a temporary fix? And if so, how long would using the pound without a currency union last before we were forced to consider a Plan C?
Cabinet Secretary, can I just remind members to speak through the Chair, please?
Presiding Officer, as I explained in my answer to Dr Murray, the Scottish Government took the advice of the Fiscal Commission Working Group, which looked at a range of what they described as viable currency options for an independent Scotland. We accepted their recommendation of the preferred and recommended approach, which was the establishment of a currency zone and the maintenance of the use of the pound sterling, which is Scotland's currency as much as the currency of the rest of the United Kingdom. And that is the approach the Scottish Government will continue to express to the people of our country.
Briefly, please, John Mason.
If the Cabinet Secretary is meeting the Chancellor, can he confirm that he will be discussing the debt as well as the pound? And is it the suggested figure of something like £25,000 per head that Scotland would be better off if the Chancellor refuses to share both?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Mr Mason makes the point that if the Chancellor wishes to continue with the line of argument that he was taking during his speech in Edinburgh, then he would essentially be signing up to saddling the United Kingdom with additional debts of up to £130 billion and debt servicing costs of between £4 to £5.5 billion each year. Now, this is equivalent to increasing the basic rate of income tax by 1 pence, and if the Chancellor wishes to sustain this line of argument and explain it to the people of the rest of the United Kingdom, then that is up to him. But I think it's an example of why the story from the UK Treasury will change once there is a successful yes vote in the referendum, and the practical benefits and realities of a currency zone between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom will be clearly demonstrated and able to be delivered in that context.
And also briefly, Malcolm Chisholm.
John Mason raised an interesting question, because it may be that a lot of people in Scotland think, well, there's some attraction in what he's suggesting, we wouldn't have to pay that money in debt. But clearly, there are many, many disadvantages that would go along with that. Why can't the Cabinet Secretary be honest with the people and spell out what he regards as the disadvantages that would go along with that scenario?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Chisholm should know that the Fiscal Commission assessed a number of options that were credible and viable currency options for an independent Scotland. The Scottish Government accepted the preferred option put forward by the Commission, which was the establishment of a currency zone. And we set out that argument. We think it is a strong and a compelling argument, not just for Scotland, but for the rest of the United Kingdom into the bargain, and we will continue to sustain that point of view to the people of our country.
Thank you. Question number 6, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Minister for Youth Employment will next visit the Stirling constituency.
Minister Angela Constance.
Presiding Officer, as it happens, I will be visiting Mr Crawford's constituency tomorrow, and I'm very much looking forward to visiting Fallon Community Enterprises and learning more about their Recycle Bike project and the contribution that that project is making to employability in the Stirling area.
Bruce Crawford.
Well, Presiding Officer, as you might imagine, I'm delighted that the Minister will be visiting the Stirling constituency tomorrow to visit Recycle Bike in my constituency of Stirling at Riverside to see for herself the great work undertaken by them. In the meantime, though, can the Minister please confirm how many modern apprenticeships were completed in Scotland during the period 1st April to the end of December 2013, and how many were in training at the end of December in the Stirling area?
Minister.
As Mr Crawford and other members in this chamber will be well aware, the Scottish Government has signed up to a very ambitious target of 25,000 new modern apprenticeship starts for every year of the lifetime of this Parliament. And it was only last week that Skills Development Scotland published information over quarter 1, 2 and 3 to the end of 2013. And I'm pleased to inform Chamber that we are indeed making very good progress towards meeting that target. In terms of starts, where we are to the end of December 2013, we are currently at 19,124 modern apprenticeship starts. I'm pleased to say that that's a 7% increase on the comparable point the year before. That's 1,200 extra starts at the end of 2013 as opposed to 2012. In terms of achievements, which relates to completions, there's an 8% increase in modern apprenticeship completions. And in terms of Mr Crawford's specific request for information, in relation to the Stirling Local Authority area, the starts were 343, and in terms of the total numbers in training in the Stirling Local Authority area, that's 642.
Thank you. Question number 7 was not lodged and an explanation has been provided. So I call question number 8. Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to establish links between key partners in innovation.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government and its partners already have strong connections in innovation, and we are already working collectively to develop these links further. Through the Scottish Government's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Framework, we are developing with public, private and third sector partners practical actions aimed at developing and embedding a culture of innovation across Scotland. We are also taking steps to improve industry and academic links by establishing Innovation Scotland as well as a network of innovation centres. Partners in health are collaborating through programmes such as the Innovation Partnership Board and Health Innovation Partnerships. These initiatives will provide a supportive environment for industry to engage with clinicians and the National Health Service.
Jim Eadie.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that comprehensive answer. Does he agree that the Edinburgh Bio-Quarter epitomises what can be achieved through successful collaboration between key agencies such as the University of Edinburgh, Scottish Enterprise and NHS Lothian to support innovation in the development of new medicines, diagnostic tools and devices to treat diseases? And what more can the Scottish Government do to support and promote Edinburgh as a leading European and global destination for innovation and translational medical research?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I do think the Edinburgh Bio-Quarter is a stunning example of the collaboration between the University, Scottish Enterprise, NHS Lothian and also the City Council, I would add. I chair a biannual forum around the Edinburgh Bio-Quarter to drive its further development and to open up and realise the opportunities highlighted by Mr Eadie in his question. The Life Science Advisory Board, which is jointly chaired by the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Dr John Brown of the Scottish Life Sciences Association, provides significant leadership in driving forward the degree of health collaboration that is required. Scotland is very well placed to be a focal point for innovation within our health service. We continue to develop the links between clinical research, academic research and the private marketplace, and the ongoing commercialisation programme at the Edinburgh Bio-Quarter has created 7 spin-out companies to date, most recently Edinburgh Molecular Imaging, which was established with a £4 million initial investment led by Edinburgh-based Epidarex. So there are many good examples of innovation and investment that are rising out of that tremendous cluster of healthcare leadership and activity within the Edinburgh Bio-Quarter.
Thank you. Question number 9, Gavin Brown.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what main changes will arise from the 2013-14 Spring Budget revision.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
The substantive changes are detailed in the introduction section of the supporting document to the Spring Budget revision, which was published on the 6th of February 2014.
Gavin Brown.
Line supporting economic growth housing supply was £373 million at the autumn budget revision. It's £341.6 million as a result of the spring budget revision. Can the Cabinet Secretary explain the sudden £30 million drop?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the issues in connection with the spring budget revision will be considered fully when I appear at the Finance Committee to consider the statutory instrument that's involved, and that takes place in the course of the next few weeks. As Mr Brown well knows, we take forward a range of changes to budget programmes to align them with a range of different factors to satisfy the Government's financial objectives in any given financial year. And I will ensure that all of the issues that we are considering within the spring budget revision are fully considered by the Finance Committee when members assess the statutory instrument.
Briefly supplementary, Ian Gray.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The outturns of the 2013-14 spring revisions, amongst many other things, will obviously inform the Cabinet Secretary's preparation of his draft budget for 2015-16. We would usually expect to see that in early September. When does he expect to publish his draft budget this year?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would expect to publish my draft budget in October of 2014.
Thank you. Question number 10, Ken McIntosh.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on promoting the German model of work sharing and work time accounts as a means of moderating the worst effects of the recession.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
The Scottish Government has used all available powers and resources to allow Scotland to continue to provide the most competitive environment for business within the United Kingdom, supporting employment and protecting people during the difficulties of the recession. While employment and industrial relations matters are currently reserved to the United Kingdom, we have made clear our commitment to a partnership approach involving employers, employees, trade unions and other interested parties to deliver sustainable economic growth.
Thank you. Ken McIntosh.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply, and can I ask him whether he agrees with me that as we emerge from the recession, this is the perfect opportunity to end the old-fashioned practices, the them and us attitudes that have so often soured employee-employer relationships, and move to more collaborative ways of working, including promoting recognising trade unions, promoting tax transparency, employee representation on boards, a focus on long-term investment and sustainability and local commitment to local communities. And can I ask him to what extent he might use the procurement bill to begin that process?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I agree substantially with the point that Mr McIntosh has made, and as a consequence, that is why the Government set up the independent review of progressive workplace policies on the 11th of February. As I'm sure Mr McIntosh is aware, this is a group which will be chaired by my former colleague, Jim Mather, the Enterprise Minister in the last Parliament, who I think, beyond dispute, brings to this area of policy some of the most creative thinking about how some of the practices of the past can be eliminated and we can work in a more collaborative way. I'm delighted with the participation that has been secured for that review, involving representatives of the trade union movement, representatives of the public sector, representatives of private industry within Scotland, and I certainly look to that review to produce some very creative thinking as to how we can advance these issues. The Government's procurement bill is designed to ensure that over the areas of activity in which we are actively procuring goods and services, we can maximise the economic impact and provide the sustainable benefits for the Scottish economy and the workforce within Scotland, and any ways in which we can strengthen that bill will of course be seized by the Government.
Briefly please, John Wilson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I draw members' attention to my register of interest, particularly my membership of Unite the Union? I welcome the statement by the Cabinet Secretary in terms of building better relations between employers and employees. Could the Cabinet Secretary outline what additional tools will be available to further build on better relations in an independent Scotland? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, clearly there's one of the limitations of the current arrangements is that many aspects of employment policy and workplace practice are reserved to the United Kingdom Government. So, of course, there may well be issues that are raised by the review that's been chaired by Mr Mather, which may stray into areas of policy over which the Government does not have responsibility. And, of course, we will be able to reflect on those issues in the once Scotland has voted yes in the referendum. So, of course, there are a wider range of responsibilities that can be taken forward, and, of course, in Scotland's future, we have set out plans to establish a Fair Work Commission and a National Convention on Labour and Employment Relations, which I think will give further emphasis to the partnership approach that the Government believes we should take on employment issues.
Thank you. Question 11, Alex Johnston.
To ask the Scottish Government how it encourages local authorities to take advantage of the private and institutional funding streams that are available to them.
Minister Derek Mackay.
In the current economic climate, both Scottish Government and local authorities have been working jointly to find innovative ways of financing investment in a range of areas. This includes investment through the HubCo initiative, Delivering Scotland Schools for the Futures, which includes revenue finance secondary schools, and attracting private investment to support affordable housing.
Alex Johnston.
The Minister may well be aware that there are a number of businesses operating in the Scottish environment today who are talking to local authorities about funding, in particular, the construction of affordable housing, and that in many cases deals are close to completion, yet there does seem to be a logjam at the moment and an unwillingness on the part of local authorities to take this forward. Is there anything the Minister can do to encourage individual local authorities to make that move and to take this opportunity for those who need housing today in Scotland?
Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government would welcome opportunities to work in partnership, and housing is as an example where there can be a partnership between a local authority and a private developer, and one that can innovate to deliver housing in a very constructive way. Some of the issues, I think, emerge around risk and guarantees, and Scottish Government's offered constructive support in mediating and navigating our way through some of this, but particularly looking at the potential, for example, of some of the pension funds and how they could be unlocked to help deliver sustainable economic growth is to be encouraged, and Scottish Government officials work closely with local authorities to try and unlock this potential and give encouragement.
Question 12, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when the Island Areas Ministerial Working Group will next meet and what will be discussed.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Island Areas Ministerial Working Group is next due to meet on the 24th of March in Stornoway. Although the agenda is yet to be finalised, the subjects for discussion will be issues of interest and importance to the Island Council areas.
Liam MacArthur.
I thank the Minister for that response. He will be aware of the opposition in the islands to the decision to move control centres for both police and fire and rescue services to the Central Belt, and he will also have heard the criticism of those moves from Orkney Islands Council. On that basis, can he advise whether the Chamber, whether this working group will take time in Stornoway to consider the impact of these and other centralising decisions are having on the three island communities, as well as the other issues that no doubt will be discussed?
Minister.
Well, I can advise Mr MacArthur that the Islands Area Working Group will consider whatever items that local authorities want to discuss with us, and that's had quite a wide-ranging agenda. And what we will do is work closely in partnership in a constructive and a positive way as we develop the proposition, as we approach the referendum, about how we can unlock the potential of the islands in the context of independence, because we on this side of the Parliament understand that only through independence can we truly empower the islands with the new powers that come to Scotland. So too we can empower the islands as well. So I look forward to that very constructive ongoing engagement with our island communities.
Very briefly, Mike Mackenzie.
I'm sure the Minister will agree that provision of interconnectors to our island groups is one of the most significant problems they face. Does he share my disappointment at the recent decision taken by wave energy company Sea Tristay to relocate from Orkney to Cornwall because of a lack of grid connection to Orkney? And does he agree that this is entirely a failure on the part of the UK Government, who have continually postponed the provision of a new interconnector to Orkney?
As briefly as possible, Minister.
We would concur with those comments, and Mr Ewing has been leading work in terms of connectivity on the islands, and I'm sure this is a subject to which we'll return.
Thank you. Question 13, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the report by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Coping with the Cuts, Local Government and Poorer Communities.
Minister Derek Mackay.
At a time when the Scottish Government's budget has been cut by around 11% in real terms over the period 2010 to 16 as a result of the austerity agendas of the Westminster parties, the Scottish Government has worked very closely with our local government partners to protect communities from the worst of those cuts. As the interim Joseph Rowntree report makes clear, Scottish local authorities have fared far better than English counterparts. Over the 4-year period 2012 to 16, local government's revenue, funding and capital share will be maintained on a like-for-like basis with extra new monies for new duties. While the Joseph Rowntree report recognises the protection we have provided to council budgets in Scotland, it is disappointing that the analysis failed to recognise that the level of funding for individual local authorities in Scotland has up until now been determined by the needs-based funding formula agreed by COSLA, which is largely the same as that inherited from the previous Labour administration and driven by population and pupil numbers. COSLA, of course, indicated that it wants to move away from this needs-based formula for the 2015-16 settlement.
Sarah Boyack.
Well, the Minister acknowledged the toxic combination of falling local budgets while costs rise by 10% and the underfunding of the council tax freeze since 2007, which has led to a crisis in council funding and undermined their capacity to serve both low-income groups and provide the range of services we would all support across the social spectrum, and that pitting authority against authority is the antithesis of the partnership working our constituents urgently need.
Minister.
Again, that it's the Scottish Government that has delivered the fair funding settlement to local government, and I would remind the Labour Party that actually voted for the budget this year in terms of the share of resources that goes to our local authorities. In all previous budgets, when the Labour Party opposed it, I never heard them call for extra resources to local authorities around Scotland. And I would quote Councillor Sir Merrick Cockle, the chairman of the LGA south of the border, who said, "Every year I meet my opposite numbers in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and they listen to us in wide-eyed disbelief at the budget cuts we are enduring, and they are not." I would agree. We have protected budgets in Scotland to protect our frontline services and the most vulnerable in this country.
Question 14, Rhoda Grant.
To ask the Scottish Government what areas of tourism it is prioritising in 2014.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
In 2014, the Government will be taking forward a range of events with partners. Homecoming Scotland provides the key focus, with Scotland enjoying over 700 events across the length and breadth of the country, as well as being host to some of the biggest sporting events in the world, the 2014 Glasgow Commonwealth Games, the Ryder Cup, and of course also the MTV Europe Awards.
Rhoda Grant.
Will the Cabinet Secretary join with me in congratulating Lewis, Harris and the Western Isles on coming top of TripAdvisor's top 10 European islands? He will also be aware that the Outer Hebrides Tourism Industry Association's concerns about ferry capacity to the islands. The Stornoway-Ullapool route was 84% capacity in sailings in July, and the Oban-Loch Boysdale route at 100% for the same period. I have in the past asked for standby lists to ascertain the level of unmet need, but cannot access those. So can I ask if the Cabinet Secretary will take steps to monitor the unmet need and keep a note of that and make it public? And also, will he make more capacity available on those sailings by making permanent the Loch Boysdale-Mallaig sailing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, can I say unreservedly that I agree with the comments that Rhoda Grant has made about Lewis and Harris. They are very special places in my heart and places that my family and I regularly visit. We won't have the privilege of trying to wrestle to get on ferries to the Western Isles this summer. We shall be wrestling to get on a ferry to Tiree this summer, which will be, I suspect, as congested as it was last summer. I take seriously the point that Rhoda Grant makes about ferry capacity. It is invaluable in ensuring that the tourism industry is able to fulfil all of its aspirations during the busy periods of the tourist season, but also critical in other times of the year for support to communities into the bargain. The Government has, of course, taken forward steps to, for the first time, I'm not sure what the historical context of this, but certainly to put in place, certainly in my recollection, a Mallaig to Loch Boysdale ferry connection. I know that's been welcomed, and the Government will, of course, continue to monitor capacity and utilisation of all ferry routes, because it's in all of our interests to make sure that we maximise the number of people who are able to visit these most special parts of our country.
We have 1 minute left, and I will call question 15. If questions and answers are brief, please. Christian Allard.
To ask the Scottish Government how the Scottish Loan Fund is helping small and medium-sized enterprises and businesses.
Cabinet Secretary.
The £113 million Scottish Loan Fund issues loans ranging from £250,000 to £2 million and, in exceptional circumstances, up to £5 million. The fund is aimed at established growth and exporting companies.
Very briefly, Christian Allard.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. Would he agree with me that the investment by the Scottish Loan Fund of £3.5 million in Correct Tracks, an energy services company based in Aberdeen, demonstrates the Scottish Government commitment at every level to the continued success of the energy sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I welcome the investment that was made in core tracks. It's an example of one of a number of investments that have been made in the oil and gas sector, and coupled to the fact that the Government also announced on Monday an oil and gas innovation centre to be based in Aberdeen to take forward many of the new approaches in technology interventions that the Government is supporting and which is just championed by the oil and gas industry, demonstrates some of the strong support that we can give to the sector and to ensure it realises its full potential within the North Sea sector.
Thank you. That ends question time and brings us to the next item of business, which